This lecture video is going to go over some of the basics of gas exchange. So we're going to talk about what actually drives oxygen going from your capillaries or from your lungs into your blood vessels and vice versa, and also looking at carbon dioxide. So this diagram is attached below this assignment, so you can print this out and use it to help follow along if you want to, and if not, you don't need to. It's just a tool for you to use. But we're going to start here looking at the process of gas exchange by looking at the alveoli, which is located right here. The alveoli is going to be obviously the extension of the lungs. This is going to represent capillaries here, so you can see that you have red blood cells that are moving single file in line through this different capillaries. This side in blue is going to represent the right side of the heart, right? It does not have oxygenated blood, and this side will represent the left side of the heart, just to kind of orientate yourself. Everything in terms of the movement of oxygen is going to be driven by the amount of oxygen present, which remember we measure in pressure. So in the alveolus, the PO2, so the amount of oxygen, is 104 millimeters of mercury. Within the blood vessel now, we're going to end up having a pressure of 100 and 100. So oxygen is going to move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Okay, high concentration 104 to an area of low concentration 100. When that oxygen ends up entering into the blood vessel, it's going to combine to red blood cells, and specifically on a red blood cell there is a molecule that's called hemoglobin. Every single hemoglobin molecule has an iron on it, and that iron will actually combine or pick up the oxygen. So iron loosely binds 4 oxygen molecules to 1 hemoglobin. It will hold on to these until the environment is either high in concentration of carbon dioxide, or if the pH drops, or if the temperature rises, in which case then it will let go of the oxygens for it to go someplace else. Now, I just said that each iron holds 4 oxygen, however, or each hemoglobin holds 4 oxygen, but every single red blood cell has 270 million hemoglobin, and if every single one of those 270 million hemoglobin can hold 4 oxygens, our red blood cells, those tiny little specks, can hold a ton of oxygen, millions and millions and millions of them. So moving on. So oxygen has gone from high concentration in our lungs to low concentration into the capillaries, where it is now combined with hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is going to carry it now through the rest of the blood system, blood vessels. So we've picked up, we're on the left side of the heart here. This oxygenated blood is now going to get delivered to the rest of the body, and it'll do so through arteries, veins, and capillaries, which are going to surround our tissue cells and then drop the oxygen off. We are going to have oxygen at 100 millimeters of mercury within these blood vessels. It is then going to travel to the different cells and tissues of our body. So this includes muscle, bone, neuron cells, anything that's going to need oxygen to carry out its chemical reactions needed for energy. And the oxygen, the PO2 levels inside of our cells or tissue, is going to be 40 millimeters of mercury. Now, if you think about it, this is going to make a lot of sense, because what's going to happen here, again, just like up here, it went from high concentration to low. Here, the oxygen levels in the blood capillaries are 100. It's 40 in here, so the oxygen is going to be released, and it is going to go into the area of low concentration, which is inside of our cells and tissues. And the reason that it does that is because there is a lot of CO2 that is present at this point in the cells, and that's going to cause the oxygen to be released. So the level of CO2 in our cells is 45 millimeters of mercury. So because of the presence of the CO2 is made as a waste product when our cells use oxygen to make energy. So that's why we have it, and because it's a waste product, we have to get rid of it. So the PCO2, or the CO2, then is going to go from an area of high concentration, which is inside the cells and tissue, and it is going to end up going the opposite direction as the oxygen and going into the vessel, right? So oxygen is still going from high concentration to low. We've now dropped it off for our cells and tissues to use, but CO2 now is going to go in the opposite direction. It's going to leave the cells, go into the capillaries, into the blood vessels, where it will then be taken out to the lungs. You can see that the PCO2 levels in the blood is 45 millimeters of mercury. So as the blood cells carry it through to the right side of the body, to the lungs, once this blood goes to through the right side of the heart, remember, so the right atrium, right ventricle, pumps it up to the lungs, then what's going to happen is that CO2 is going to get dropped off, so it is going to move in the opposite direction, and then the oxygen will come back in. So as you look at this diagram, what I want you to think about is, what would the CO2 level be in the alveolus in order for the CO2 to go from the blood into the alveoli, which once it gets into the alveoli, you will breathe the rest of it out. Well, remember that carbon dioxide has to go, just like oxygen, from high pressure to low pressure. So we have to know if the PCO2 level inside the capillary is 45 millimeters of mercury, the PCO2 inside the alveolus has to be less than that. And it will actually end up being 40. So again, carbon dioxide will go from 45, high pressure, to 40, which is low pressure. And then you can see how the oxygen moves. So to summarize gas exchange, it is going to be driven by the concentration or the pressure of oxygen and the pressure of carbon dioxide. It's always going to go from high concentration to low. So the highest concentration of oxygen will be in the alveoli. It will then diffuse into the red blood cells. The red blood cells will pick the oxygen up on its hemoglobin, carry it around to through the different vessels to the body tissues, where it will get delivered because the concentration of oxygen is low in them. And at the same time, when this happens, the CO2 is going to go from high concentration in the cells to the blood vessels, travel around, and they will get pulled into the lungs because the alveoli has a low concentration of CO2. So that is what happens in gas exchange.